Hello and welcome to Occult Lives. This is Debbie Elliott and today I'm talking to Joe McKeany and we are going to discuss self-empowerment from the esoteric perspective. So if I hand over to you, Joe, if you'd like to give us a little intro as to what this is about.
Okay, so we're going to start today with essence, personality and the false ego. What is really important about essence, personality and the false ego is that we can use it as a template to understand how we can become empowered as human beings. It's one of the best templates around today. It comes from Gurdjieff. It's from Gurdjieff's teaching. And
this is George Ivanovich Gurdjieff,
yes,
isn't it?
And I'm going to explain to you a little bit about essence, personality and the false ego. And everything we talk about today will basically refer to essence, personality and the false ego. We can refer it back to this sort of template, this structure. So essence is what we're born with. It's like a tabula rasa. It's like a blank sheet. But essence does have certain tendencies. It does have certain hereditary in it. It comes through in essence. Then personality is what? It's a veneer in our makeup from society. It's not real. It's quite false in many ways. And the false ego is basically the pernicious side to personality. It's the negative side of personality. So I'm going to give you some hints on these three things so you can understand it better. Essence feeds on truth and can only grow and mature through the reception of truth. That is who you really are, your core. Personality, which is a veneer from society, feeds on half-truths and complex lies. On the other hand, the false ego, which is part of personality, feeds on arguments, prejudice, fantasy, negativity, and conflict.
So we could say that essence is like a divine spark inside ourselves,
That's
maybe?
it, yeah. Except the difference between Gurdjieff's teaching and all the other teachings we find in society today is that Gurdjieff says that in modern man, essence is underdeveloped and immature. And for example, he will tell you in his teachings that the average Westerner, that is, the average intellectual and highly educated Western person, their essence age is probably somewhere between 5 and 6 years of age. And with some people, maybe 10 or 12 years of age. So that is why you will find a lot of people who are very intellectual, but however, they're very immature. And if they don't get things going their own way, you have temper tantrums, you have poor manifestations of them as human beings. And this is to do with essence and personality.
Because they're not developing everything properly, they're only developing certain sides of themselves.
Yeah, it means that their essence is not developed at the same tempo as their personality. Their essence is much less developed. So if we use this as a template for what we're going to go into today, what we're going to discuss and what we're going to look at, it's actually a very, very exceptional template for this type of work and this type of study, and also explaining how one can be empowered spiritually in the world today. So I'm going to read you this really interesting quote. So if you bear in mind that essence feeds on truth and it's the core of who we are, and personality is a veneer, a societal construct. It's constructed in us through and by society.
By our peers, our teachers, our
Yes,
parents,
our education,
influences
yes,
us.
our education, our religion, politics, all the rest, that creates personality. This is a very powerful Sufi quotation which really talks about essence in the most concise and very powerful way. And it's by a very famous Sufi teacher called Sadai of Shiraz. And here it goes. However much you study, you cannot know without action. A donkey laden with books is neither a wise man nor an intellectual. Empty of essence, what learning has he, whether upon him is firewood or books? So what Sadai of Shiraz is getting at is that if a person's essence is not developed, the person's learning is not going to be very high. It's going to be basically an intellectual veneer in personality. It's not going to be deep, profound learning. And this is what Gurdjieff explains, that there's a big difference between intellectual learning and cognitive ability. And most modern people don't understand this. Intellectual ability is the function of one center, the mind. But cognitive ability is the function of three centers, three chakras working harmoniously: the intellectual center, the instinctive moving center, and the emotional center. So only with those three centers working together and the higher parts of centers working in unison can we have this cognitive ability. So most people in the Western world only work with the intellectual center for the majority of the time. With art and certain other things, it's different. And the person then begins to work with emotions and with the instinctive moving center. But for the most, with colleges and schools, it's the mind, it's the intellectual center. So this quotation from Sadai shows us how deep the Sufis understand this concept of essence. Essence is pivotal in all spiritual work.
And with the essence, we use personality in our everyday being. So a lot of the time we're using the personality probably wrongly, perhaps thinking when we should be feeling with our emotions, and perhaps not being emotional and using our intellect instead when it should be the other way around, perhaps using the wrong centres at the wrong times.
That's it. Yeah, so the aim of becoming empowered, we have to work with essence. We have to find a way of moving into essence, to maturing essence, to growing essence. And this means that if we succeed in working with essence, that we become more mature, more reliable, more real, a person of more substance, a person. The natural qualities of essence are sensitivity, compassion, courage, humility, sincerity. All these are the natural qualities of essence. Now, you will find these qualities in a lot of people, but they're in personality. So they lack veracity and they lack substance. So we need to develop these qualities not in essence, not in personality, but in essence. And this is the key to self-empowerment. If we can begin to develop these qualities in essence, we become much more empowered, whether we are a man or a woman. So the next thing I wanted to move on to, and which is directly connected to essence and personality, is internal and external power. And this is a very, very interesting subject, internal and external power. And to start off, I'd say that, first of all, you have to understand that internal power is linked to essence and external power is linked to personality. So with the majority of people in the world, we're looking at external power. We're looking at people who want power over others.
Right, okay, power and control of their lives.
Yeah.
Right, I see.
Another facet of this is where people want to be totally controlling in their own lives, right down to the extreme minutiae of their lives. And they feel if they can gain control of all the minutiae of their everyday lives, that this will empower them. But actually this doesn't work in practice. It seems to work in the beginning, but actually it doesn't really work in practice. And I want to read you this very short quote from Celia Elworthy from a book called Power and Sex. And it's a really good take on internal and external power. And she says, "Dominating power seeks out the weaknesses of others and trades upon it. Inner power looks for other people's strengths and relies on them." So there's a difference in quality and deportment of internal and external power. External power, people will always look to find your weaknesses, to control you, to manipulate you, to pull the carpet. People who are coming from essence, from internal power, they will look at your strengths. They are not interested in blame. They're not interested in pulling the carpet from underneath you. They're not interested in dominating you. They're not interested in manipulating you. They will look at your strengths and they will focus on your strengths. It doesn't mean they're not aware of your weaknesses, but they will focus on your strengths. So this is the difference between internal and external power.
So these are the kind of people that want to work with everybody well in everything.
Yeah. I mean, a good example of this would have been Mahatma Gandhi. Mm-hmm. He's and also the Dalai Lama. I mean, we could pick out dozens of these people, and there are lots of people that are unknown who work like this, who are centered in internal power. And it's a quality that you must develop if you want to become empowered. as a human being, because the two sides of the empowerment coin are always the spiritual side and the mundane side. They're two sides of one coin. But if one comes from the spiritual, the mundane side usually follows behind naturally. So it's better to focus on the spiritual side first and not be too caught up with mundane and physical matters, everyday today matters. Although I'm not saying they're not important. Of course they're important. We all have to earn money. We all have to work. But from the esoteric perspective, we need to focus primarily on the spiritual side of our lives and give less attention, if you like, to the material side, if you'd like to look at it that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, the material side's a development of humanity anyway, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I wanted to go to section 3, taking back your power, because we've got about a little bit over an hour, so if we can move forward, I guess it'd be a good idea. Taking back one's power. This is another really interesting element in self-empowerment, simply because so many people give away their power to a boss, to a guru, to a priest, to our professor, or even to religion, and sometimes even to our mum and dad. Part of the equation is that we do not take the very necessary responsibility for our lives and all of the components thereof. We turn this responsibility over to others, and this is our greatest weakness. Obviously, as we are in our teenage years, we tend to do this a lot. But when we reach the age of maturity, we should realize that we have to take more responsibility for ourselves, our actions, and our own spirituality as well. A lot of people tend to give away the power of their own spirituality to others. And this is thus the guru phenomenon, where a lot of people, in inverted commas, want to be saved.
And they want to be led. Because a lot of people don't know where to go. They feel so lost, so they follow whoever rings their bell at that time.
That's it. And taking back our power is a rebellion, a positive rebellion. It is a core element of self-empowerment. I'm going to read you a very interesting quote from this guy called Anthony Anazagoro, and it goes like this. Rebellion is when you look society in the face and say, I understand who you want me to be, but I'm going to show you who I actually am.
Brilliant, yeah.
So,
everyone be themselves, as long as it's in a good person way.
So taking back our power is very, very important, because we cannot come into our power if we've given away our power to our friends, to a partner, to a guru, to a religious leader. And of course, for some people, to do this temporarily can be helpful. I would say that is true. If, for some people, they've had an experience with a guru which has been incredibly insightful and powerful in their lives and helpful. But my personal experience is, if you do this permanently, this is not a good thing, because you've given away your power permanently, and you're always a follower, in a sense. You're always, in inverted commas, at the mercy of this guru or this spiritual leader or this person, this individual, whether it be male or female.
Well, most of the good teachers have been ones that have had a good teacher that they had broken away from. We could say that with Gurdjieff himself, with Ouspensky, and probably some others that probably broke away, went on to continue their teaching and continuing the esoteric work. And for a lot of people, that is the problem of breaking away. It's that having to go and do it by themselves. It's safe, isn't it, to stay in that environment where the guru's leading you, showing you.
This is the interesting thing, because when we develop essence to a certain degree, we lose the insecurity. This is what is really interesting. Once essence begins to develop, that insecurity falls away. We're no longer insecure about ourselves, what we understand, our own development, whether it be of great magnitude or low magnitude, we accept it. We're no longer hard on ourselves. We just see how we are as human beings. We see our level. We understand that we have a long way to go, and we don't need to be a follower of any guru or priest or religion. We can do it for ourselves, and this comes with a lot of study, a lot of understanding, and essence development. If we remain in personality is a very insecure entity. It always wants to be led, because personality is a societal construct. So its very nature is that it follows the dictates of society. So essence is a natural rebel. Essence is not particularly interested in following anything unless for a certain duration to give it what it needs to become free.
Right, okay then.
So essence has got some definitive qualities that are totally different than personality. Of course, personality with some people has this kernel, this core, which is the false ego. And the false ego wants to control. It wants to be right, always. It wants to be the center of attention. It wants to manipulate. And also there is a huge element of sabotage in the false ego. False ego is a jealous entity, and it will often sabotage its partner or its friends.
Or even itself, isn't
Or
it?
even
Sometimes
itself.
sabotages your own
Yes,
life.
self-sabotage is
Doesn't want you
very
to go
prominent
forward.
among modern peoples. It's a huge prominent psychological feature of most modern people. They self-sabotage their own future, their own abilities. And it's a very sad psychological feature of a lot of people.
Because some people might understand this as this false ego is when we are using excuses to stop us going forward.
Yeah.
We make excuses for ourselves.
Yes. The false ego is really the opposite pole of what essence is. It's completely the opposite. It's like a small, dark, cowardly creature, whereas essence is more like a sunflower with its petals open to the sun, which is natural and free, and has a benevolence about it. The natural qualities of essence is benevolence, pure benevolence, generosity, kindness, sensitivity. These are the natural qualities of essence, but they are definitely not the natural qualities of the false ego. So, yeah, we can use that template all the way through our little talk to exemplify how self-empowerment must be connected to the spiritual, and it must be connected to the development of essence. So I was going to go on to the next section, which is very important. And the next section I have prepared for you is we cannot build our spiritual life, we cannot build essence on negative qualities. So, in other words, we can't build essence on top of personality or the false ego. We have to destroy the false ego in ourselves and render personality passive. So a good way of describing this, I used this sort of simile in a talk recently. The personality has to become like a backseat passenger, and essence has to take steering wheel. So essence has to become the active force, and personality has to become the passenger. So personality is very useful in society. It's a societal navigator. It's a societal navigating system. So we need personality, but personality mustn't be the active force. It mustn't be in control.
So this is what helps us to interact with other people,
Yes.
with how we go to work,
Yes.
our everyday business.
Yes, very important. When one reaches a very high level of development, of course, personality is no longer necessary. But for the majority of us mortals, human beings, in the early stages of self-empowerment, we definitely need personality. It's very important. But we don't need the false ego. That we must try and destroy at all costs, because, as Maurice Nicole said, who's a student of Gurdjieff, as you know, he said that the false ego causes us so much unnecessary suffering by giving us a wrong picture of who we are. It causes incredible amount of suffering. So let's look at the addressing personal deficiencies. And I want to read a quote from Ouspensky on this. He talks about our being, how deficient our being is in Western people, and how we don't even notice this. So it goes like this. People of Western culture put great value on the level of a man's knowledge, but they do not value the level of a man's being, that is, his essence, if you like, in one way, and are not ashamed of the low level of their own being. They do not even understand what it means, and they do not understand that a man's knowledge depends on the level of his being. So here we have a very interesting principle from the esotericism and from Gurdjieff, that our knowledge really depends on the level of our being. In other words, when we develop our essence, our understanding, our cognitive ability deepens. It becomes more profound. It goes way beyond any intellectual understanding of life or ourselves. We begin to understand things on a different level completely, on a different series of levels, really. Because as our essence begins to expand, we begin to see things that we formerly didn't understand, and we begin to see that formerly we were myopic, we were short-sighted. A lot of things that we presumed about ourselves and we presumed about other people. So Ouspensky's quote is very interesting from the point of view that he explains that us, Western people in particular, we are not ashamed of the low level of our being, but we may be ashamed of the low level of our knowledge, of our intellectual capacity. And this is really interesting because we should really be more ashamed of the level of our being, of our qualities as a human being. And this is one of the things also that I wanted to mention. You cannot build a spiritual structure, you cannot build self-empowerment for real on a negative base. So before we develop spiritually, or before we develop self-empowerment for ourselves, we have to rid ourselves of lots of negative qualities, all those negative things in us that affects us very, very deeply.
So these are things like our, like you were saying earlier, jealousies and our prejudices and things like this, isn't it? Things that would not make us see justly.
That's right, exactly. So I mean, I'm going to extrapolate from the book I've written on this subject, and I'm going to mention some of the things, some of the weaknesses that we have. So to give an example to the audience of a lot of the weaknesses that we as Western people, and of course Eastern people as well, that we have to work on. And some of them we have to eradicate, some of them we have to alter. And the first one I'm going to mention is narrow self-interest. And this is a difficult one, especially for Western people to understand, because we've been brought up to think that everything is predicated on narrow self-interest. But actually, if a Western person thinks if they remove narrow self-interest from themselves, there is nothing left. There's just a blank sheet. But actually, this is completely wrong thinking. This is defective thinking. We can go through life and we can become far more real, a person of far more substance, if we lose this element of narrow self-interest, because it tends to color and flavor all our actions and all the things we do and how we behave, and even the background to our behavior, the motivations and all of the things that come before our manifestations and behavior and our actions, those elements in the background, it colors all of these things. So if we can think about narrow self-interest and how we can curtail it and act from a bigger base, a bigger perspective, to take in other people and to see other people in a different way. We have to see people from the point of view of the fact that they are spirits in the material world just as we are, and they have weaknesses just as we have. They have myopic elements to their nature just as we have. So narrow self-interest is something one has to work on over time. We don't get it right quickly. It takes a little bit of time to do that. But it's one of the more interesting facets of the work that we have to do on our negative side. Another one that I'm going to mention tonight is mental editing. And this is a really powerful and important facet of our mindset. And if you talk to somebody about the subject of self-empowerment, especially with reference to esotericism and ancient knowledge, they will usually mentally edit out a lot of the core elements that you will try to communicate to them. Like I just mentioned one just now of narrow self-interest. And this mental editing happens with majority of people. So it's very common if you were to sit down and talk to a friend about some esoteric principle, which is very, very important, and you might see that person a week later and talk to them about the same subject, and you will find that they have taken from the conversation only things that relate to their way of thinking. They will not remember or have taken in all those elements which you were so working hard to communicate to that person about the subject. So this is mental editing, and this is another thing we have to work on. We have to learn to listen. without removing and stripping out elements that doesn't appeal to our mindset or that we have a negative attitude towards. We have to change how we listen and how we take in information and knowledge. Unfortunately, this mechanism has been constructed in us through our modern education. And this is one of the defects of modern education as well. But we could actually spend a whole workshop talking about modern education.
We'll do that another time.
Yes.
Because a lot of people call this selective hearing, and it's something
Yes.
I was guilty of when I was young. I tried to pay attention when I listen to people now, but that's from having done this kind of work and esoteric work. But a lot of people don't realise they're doing it.
Yes. Yes, and the next element I was going to move on to was double standards. It's easy to see double standards in other people, but it's not so easy to see double standards in ourselves. So, I mean, an example of this is where maybe you will have a friend and they have certain standards for their friends' children when their friends' children come around. But their own children, they don't have the same exacting standards at all, and they cannot see the discrepancy.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot see the juxtaposition of these two things, even if you point it out to them, because they have all these blockages about these type of things. But double standards, which in olden times was called hypocrisy, it is another defect of our psyche, our modern psyche, and I think almost everybody has witnessed this in other people, in their friends. But it's really worthwhile looking at it in ourselves, because this is another negative element that we can actually look at very closely, and we can work out a lot of the double standards that we possess, especially if we ask our friends to be totally, ruthlessly honest with us. They will help us to do this.
Because we know when we're doing it, and if you're with other people and you're doing it, they all know, and there's that awkward silence, and then it's all, let's pretend that didn't happen.
Yeah. Another one that I would like to mention tonight is blame. So blame is often used as a weapon, especially in relationships. And of course, the very wise ones, the masters of wisdom of ancient times, they said, use blame very cautiously, because blame is a very poisonous and destructive element between people. So we should blame people very cautiously, and we should praise people generously. So another way of looking at that is to try and focus, if you can, on people's strengths and not focus on people's weaknesses, because we all have weaknesses. And I think it's better in the beginning with our friends to focus on their strengths and come from essence, because essence focuses on the person's strengths. Essence does not look at your weaknesses in order to try and pull the rug. That's not how essence manifests. Essence sees all the other person's weaknesses, but essence is not interested in blaming or being negative or pulling the rug from the other person. So blame is another element that I wanted to mention that we have to look at in ourselves. Another element also is fear thinking. A lot of people, they come from this negative base and their thinking is riddled with fear. So they find it very difficult to take a risk in life, even incremental, small risk taking, because there's too much fear inside them.
Fear is one of the big stoppers, definitely. I've seen other people stop doing things because they fear what the outcome will be, or fear they're not good enough, fear they can't do it. But, you know, it's all part of the trip of life, of giving it a go.
Yes, and fear of what other people might think of them or say about them. And we have to get past this element of worrying about what other people think about you. You have to do the core elements of your life without fear. This is difficult, there's no doubt about it. This is not easy. Getting past this fear thinking comes with when we begin to develop essence, and essence gets stronger. Essence is then less and less concerned with what other people think, because it's building its own strength. This matrix inside is becoming stronger. It's becoming more vociferous. Personality is becoming more passive, because it's like a seesaw effect. Once essence is in the ascendant, personality begins to dip. This is a natural juxtaposition of the two things, because when essence strengthens, personality naturally weakens. It's a natural phenomenon. So we're looking at a lot of the things, the weaknesses in the human psyche in modern day people. Another weakness in our psyche is called narrow judgmental thinking. And I'll give you a few examples of narrow judgmental thinking so that you can understand where I'm coming from. A person will look at others from a sort of a high vantage point and look down on other people. And they will have their own standards and look down on other people as their standards are not good enough. And here are some examples of the standards that this person might look down upon others. They will look at like fashion and dress, wealth, status and class, accent, musical affiliations, nationality, job, what job you do, customs, level of intelligence, in inverted commas, religion, your background education, and your schools attended. So this is all narrow judgmental thinking. And sometimes this tradition of looking at people from this perspective can even block a friendship between two natural allies, two people who could be very, very close friends, can be blocked if we have these very narrow forms of judgmental thinking. It blocks that friendship from flowering.
And also being judgmental, then if you're being judgmental, then you're not accepting that everyone's different, even though we are all the same, but we're also different.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I'll quote one last interesting element, which is known to modern psychology as well. It's called projection. So a lot of people who are emotionally imbalanced will project that imbalance, that emotional imbalance onto other people. So for instance, you might have a person who's very neurotic. So they will always say that the other person, who may be a friend or a relative, they quite often say that person is very, very negative, very, very neurotic, whereas actually the person themselves may just be that neurotic person. So this facet of projecting, and it's called projection in modern psychology, is a very interesting one for us to think about. Do we project onto other people? It needs a little bit of self-observation and a little bit of ruthless honesty. We have to look at ourselves and see if we're doing that projecting onto others. And if we find, honestly and sincerely, that we're not, this is a really good thing. This is a really good thing. But it's something that we have to do what you might call self-inquiry into.
So if you're not projecting onto others, then you're being quite honest. Well, you're being honest.
Yeah, you're being more sincere. You're being more sincere for sure. So then we've looked at some of the deficiencies that are in us as human beings, and there are obviously dozens of more of these deficiencies and malformed elements in our psyche and in our behavior. But then we have to come to the part of how we work on those deficiencies. It's very important that we take a view to working to remove these, because I said earlier, we cannot develop real self-empowerment and real spirituality without removing these negative elements first. We can create a veneer on top, but it's like building a castle on sand. Many people go to gurus and they follow different systems, including Advaita Vedanta and various other teachings. And what they do is they build this spiritual superstructure on top of the false ego, on top of personality. And of course, what's underneath is not strong enough to support what, if you like, is on top.
What you're building, yeah.
Yeah. So it will crash eventually. So any spiritual path we choose, it must have the precursor of removing and working on our negative side. At the very minimum, it has to happen simultaneously. We have to work at developing positive qualities in essence and destroying negative qualities in personality and sometimes in essence as well. So working on personal deficiencies, I'm going to give you a quote from the Dalai Lama on this. To be aware of a single shortcoming within oneself is more useful than to be aware of 1,000 in somebody else. So this is the Dalai Lama, who's obviously a Buddhist, talking about the same subject of working on personal deficiencies. So real empowerment does not come from conventional education, traditional culture, academia, armchair philosophy, public accolades, medals, backslapping ceremonies. Real empowerment doesn't come from those things. It comes from developing certain real qualities and abilities, certain cognitive powers, and higher being internally. These are not acquired through the ordinary conditions of cultural life, simply because our current civilization is too superficial. We have to find the means to realize our hidden potential.
So it's like continuing into our lives, learning more about ourselves to make ourselves a better person. But it means facing our, like you were saying, our negative traits, our dark side.
Our dark side.
And not burying them, but working on them so that you know why you were like that, why it developed.
First of all, you have to acknowledge that they exist. That's the first thing. Most of us are in denial. Somebody might come up and say to that person, well, you know, you spend your whole time looking at dark elements on the internet. You know, all of the snuff movies and pornography and all sorts of things. Grisly views of bodies being opened during surgery and car crashes and all these dark things, which Gurdjieff explains is giving you a huge amount of dark energy, a huge amount of dark impressions, if you like, and that's feeding into the brain, into the emotions, and into the head center of the mind.
It must affect people.
Yes.
These people that say, oh, it doesn't affect me, but it must do.
It does. It does. And it means that if we pursue this type of dark energy, we strengthen the false ego. The false ego becomes gargantuan and strong and robust, very hard to defeat. So we must, as much as possible, stay away from dark energy and dark elements of society. So working on personal deficiencies, some of the things, and we won't get through all of them this evening, but I'm going to mention some of the things that we can do to work on personal deficiencies. One of them is karma yoga. Another is to develop the 4 powers of essence, the 4 cardinal powers of essence. And yet another one is reciprocity, to be reciprocal with people. And yet another one is developing moral and psychic force. And the last one I'll mention tonight is group work. This is a really powerful force for developing yourself. If you can find an authentic group where the work is of a pure nature and it hasn't been adulterated by the leaders of the group, or it hasn't been turned into a cult. Because a friend of mine once said, a great Qigong teacher in London said, his name by the way is Andy Henry, he said that most groups and cults on this earth feed on 3 things. Their existence is predicated on 3 things: money, sex, and power. So this work, this last item I mentioned, group work, you have to find a group where it's not predicated on those things, that it's predicated on authentic people at the head of such a group. So to go back to the first element I mentioned, karma yoga, Western people have no idea about karma yoga. This is what I discovered in teaching workshops. People here think that karma yoga is giving and they can never possibly receive back. They see it as a kind of profit and loss account. This is how the logical mind sees karma.
So it's a one-way thing.
Most people cannot see
It's
how...
not.
Yeah, most people look at karma logically, but karma is not logical. When you work in a positive way as a human being towards other people and in situations, the karma that you're creating, the positive karma you're creating for yourself and others, does not necessarily come back at all in the way that you expect. Not at all. It's never logical. This is the thing you have to understand about karma, and one must never engage in karma yoga with the hope that tomorrow I'm going to win the lottery or next year or something like this, because this is a childish approach to karma yoga. In fact, the real raison d'etre of karma yoga is to change our being. Because if we engage in karma yoga, if we engage in doing spontaneous good deeds for other people and helping other people spontaneously without waiting for reward or expecting reward, we're actually altering the qualities of our being. We're working on essence. So one of the cardinal and preeminent forms of working on essence is karma yoga. So of course it means spontaneous kind deeds to other people, but it doesn't mean, on the other side of the coin, it doesn't mean that we spend our whole time running around looking for opportunities to do kind deeds. That is
charitable deeds.
That is not what it means. It means when the opportunity arises that we don't walk away.
So we're not doing it for a reward, we're doing it because because it would make the world a better place if we were all being good to each other.
There are many reasons, but the cardinal one for self-empowerment is that in one fell swoop we can do 2 things. We can help other people unselfishly, and we can help develop our own essence at the same time. It's a double-sided coin, which is very, very powerful. And karma yoga, despite what people think, is much more powerful than people actually think. Because karma yoga, if you perform karma yoga properly over a number of years, it can literally save your life. It can be the difference between you might be the one person in that car that survives that car crash. And when the police arrive in the ambulance, they have no idea how you've come out alive. And it could simply be because of karma yoga. Sometimes, of course, it can be because of accidents. It can be accidental that you've survived. But if you have worked very arduously and very hard at karma yoga, the reason is likely to be karma, that you might be that one person to survive from that train or that car crash. So karma yoga is much more powerful than we understand.
Karma yoga is a law that is beyond us.
It's beyond the understanding of the logical mind. But the incredible thing about karma is that we can engage in karma yoga even though we don't fully understand it. The full understanding of karma is the remit of a higher form of ourselves. In other words, ourselves on a higher spiritual level. So if we reach that level, then we fully understand karma. And then we fully understand why we engaged in karma yoga years before. So that's how spirituality works, really. It's kind of strange, but that's how it works.
So it's like the revelations come with it as we develop.
That's it. Yeah. We expand and we lose our myopia, our short-sightedness as human beings. So going on from karma yoga, we'll go to developing the 4 powers of essence, which are courage, tenacity, sincerity, and humility. So if we want to develop self-empowerment, those 4 cardinal elements of our nature, if we work on those things, and sometimes we have to work on these things indirectly. Sometimes we have to stretch ourselves. We have to put ourselves into positions that are not naturally or normally easy for us. But if we stretch our abilities and we work at developing these qualities, we can outdo ourselves. We can go far beyond what we think we are capable of. And this is how we develop essence. We have to stretch ourselves, put ourselves sometimes into situations that are not easy, that really stretch our patience, really stretch our abilities. And this is developing the 4 powers of essence.
It's like the challenges give us not a better reward, but a better understanding. Well, it is a reward of how it's developing our essence into the better person, so the higher being.
Yeah, we can work on essence from many, many different ways. And the best ways of working on essence is to use a spiritual system, an esoteric system. But also, we can use certain facets of our environment. If we put ourselves into situations, I'm not suggesting that people listening should specifically do this to get a kick out of this, but we can put ourselves into situations that are not, because in our Western cultures we're very safe. We don't take risks. We're surrounded by police and army, so we're kind of, in inverted commas, protected in a certain respect. But to develop essence, if we put ourselves outside the normal scope of ordinary society, if we put ourselves in the natural environment where nothing is guaranteed, where there are elements of danger, and we have to develop certain hone skills of sensitivity and hone skills of
I suppose survival
and our instinctual center. Because when we leave the environments of urban living and we go into the countryside or the outback or the mountains or the desert, into strange and alien environments for some people, then we can actually stretch essence quite a bit. We can actually develop essence, get stronger in an environment which is not an urban controlled environment. So we have to make decisions for ourselves. We have to learn new skills. We have to learn new abilities. We have to strengthen the abilities of our instinctual center. Our instinctual center has to be honed, it has to grow in order to survive, if you like. Mm-hmm. So this is very empowering for essence. It strengthens essence. Living in an urban environment has the opposite effect. essence. It doesn't strengthen essence, it strengthens personality.
Because you're caught up in the society and your personality is what's then doing all the work.
So we need a combination of a spiritual system, an authentic spiritual system to work with, and also not always hiding in urban environments. This is the combination of these two is very powerful to develop essence. So it's going to move on to the subject of reciprocity. This is for working on personal deficiencies. If we work and understand how important reciprocity is, and try and do a minor examination if we are, to look at ourselves and see if we are really reciprocal with other people, and how our reciprocity works. Do we really engage in reciprocity, or are we always, despite ourselves, we are in a one-way street where we want to receive, but we don't want to reciprocate with other people? And this is, even though it's a very simple element to look at, it's very, very important. And we can discover by looking at this item of reciprocity, we can actually discover if we are open people, generous people, or if we have this trait of selfishness, or being closed people. So reciprocity, a very, very important facet of working on our personal deficiencies. And the next element is working on moral and psychic force. So moral force is our qualities and abilities in essence. And if we develop the qualities and our abilities in essence to a high level, we just mentioned this about non-urban environments and working with the spiritual system. So we develop this moral force. We've often heard the expression, perhaps in years gone by, that person had great moral power. It means that they have more substance. They have a strength, internal strength. They know what is right from wrong. Yeah, they don't have to sit down and intellectualize it. They know emotionally, intellectually, and instinctually, they know what is right from wrong because they have the experience and they are deeply involved with spirituality, so they don't have to intellectualize it. So moral force is being able to develop these qualities in ourselves that makes us stronger, that makes us more real, it gives us a tenacity and gives us a new vision of life, if you like. Now, psychic force is slightly different than moral force. Psychic force is the flip side of the coin of the moral force. Psychic force means that we can see deeply into other people, and we can see deeply into ourselves, and we can see deeply into situations that we're surrounded by. So we can navigate these situations, and we can navigate with our fellow men and fellow women in a just way towards them and towards ourselves.
So it's like being in tune.
Yes, psychic force, one of the great developers of psychic force is if you use an authentic esoteric system. If you study and absorb and use practically a good esoteric system, it will help you to develop psychic force very strongly. So you will be able to spot con men a mile away, and you'll be able to, when somebody lies in your presence, you instantly sense from the intonation and body language of the person, you instantly sense that you're being lied to.
So you smell the ball.
This is connected, yeah. These things are very much connected, moral force and psychic force. And the last item I was going to mention in relation to personal deficiencies and working on personal deficiencies is group work. So group work is incredibly important because if we work in a group, we can quadruple our forward momentum in developing internal power, in developing moral force, in developing understanding and penetrating vision. We can really move forward very fast. And for some people, group work can be incredibly dynamic, and for other people, group work, they don't get any traction. They find it difficult. So it's not a cure-all. It's not a pill that will work for everybody. But in general, group work is, I would say, from my personal experience, is very useful for people who want to work spiritually and people who want self-empowerment in a real dynamic sense, coming from substance and not just, from the intellectual veneer that we find in society today.
I think sometimes with group work, from my own experience, is being with people that are on the same mission or the path, maybe in different ways, but they all want to do the work. It's not a little bit of any quick evening out for them.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's good to be in a group work just
Yeah.
for that, to be regained into that kind of society.
Yeah, group work can be differentiated from lectures and workshops in the sense that a lot of lectures and workshops are one-off events for a lot of organizations. But group work means that you meet regularly, and there are two levels to group work really. The first level is where everybody meets and they're still, in a sense, strangers. So then we share on a certain level, but then there's the second level when the group is going for a long time and we feel more comfortable with those present, so we can share more of our own weaknesses, and they who are present can also share more of their experiences and perhaps weaknesses to us. So we mirror each other and we can see in another person's weakness our weakness, because one might say, actually, I do that as well. You may not have been courageous enough to say, hang on a sec, be the first one to put your hand up and go, I do that a lot. When the other person goes, this is one of my big problems, and you go, wow, that's strange because I do that too, and it's a major problem for me as well, and I've only really noticed it now that you've pointed it out.
We lie to ourselves a lot, don't we?
Yes, we lie to ourselves a lot, and we fudge a lot of things in ourselves because it's convenient and it's not so painful.
Yes.
And it's not so embarrassing, because embarrassment is a lot of the problem with people in groups, and we're human beings. That's how we are.
Yeah.
But we can get past that in the second level of groups. When we become more intimate with each other on a spiritual level, we can start to reflect things for each other, mirror things, and with using an authentic esoteric system, we can use the principles and ideas and the practices involved to really begin to evolve our self-empowerment. And actually, if a few years down the line, we can look back and we can see that we are a different person, that we've moved on dramatically. I'm not saying that will happen for everybody, but if we try quite hard and we really work at it, we are definitely going to move forward. There's no doubt about that.
Most of the time I've found, and from other people have said as well, it's a very subtle effect, the esoteric path.
Yes, can be.
But as you say, then you look back a few years later and you think, oh, wow, I've changed so much, and hopefully for the better and the more positive.
Yeah, because esotericism, the esoteric world, is really about developing a more positive, dynamic person of substance, person with new abilities, new qualities, and a new vision. And this is really important, these elements. And there are obviously many, many more, but I'm just mentioning the principal ones. I was going to move on to one more element if we've got time.
Sure, yeah. We'll do this the next one and then we'll have to wrap it up.
Okay, so we have many more different chapters on this subject, but we're just going to go into number 6, which is cleansing the emotional center, which is a really important one for us if we want to move forward in self-empowerment, because and I'm going to read this little piece because it's very, very interesting. Cleansing the emotional center. Negative emotions are a huge disempowerment for many, many people. They create unnecessary hate, racism, fear, jealousy, anger, negative moods and states, resentment, misogyny, even sometimes depression. Working to cleanse our emotional center is pivotal in the process of self-empowerment. We cannot have a clear and coherent perspective of life if we do not possess a clear emotional field. We are surrounded by deception, lies, half-truths, pseudoculture, fake educational modalities, war, rape, injustice, corruption, a fake version of history and anthropology, misogyny, racism, crass consumerism, etc. Our emotional center reflects this confusion. Fear, insecurity, ignorance, racism, pseudoculture, fake educational modalities. We are not exempt. The power of society to infiltrate our psyche is beyond what most people think. Our emotional field is like a mirror of the culture we inhabit. We reflect much of what's around us, despite ourselves. That is, without inner work. So inner work is very, very important if we are to dispel all the illusions that are around us. Our education system does not give us the blueprint we need to create solid foundations for real inner power, nor does it give us a template upon which we can build an authentic spiritual life. Because of our societal conditioning, most modern people do not even notice this. So I want to read you one of the last quotes I'm going to read you. This is from, I don't know if you've heard of Doris Lessing.
Yes. Yeah.
This is from Doris Lessing.
Spiritualist, wasn't she?
2007 Nobel Prize winner for literature. And this is what she has to say. You are in a process of being indoctrinated. We have not yet evolved a system of education that's not a system of indoctrination. What you are being taught here is an amalgam of current prejudice and the choices of this particular culture. The slightest look at history will show how impermanent these must be. So that's a quote from a Nobel Prize winner for literature. So her words chime exactly with the esoteric view of modern culture and modern education. And here's a quote by Gurdjieff on wrong education in modern man. Through their influence, wise tutors can repair the psyche of those who have been miseducated if they watch over them for 2 years.
For 2 years.
For 2 years.
Because it's definitely miseducation is responsible for a lot of the problems of this world.
That's it, yeah. Because there's a lot of subtext in modern education that's never vocalized, but it's there. It's in the small print, if you like, of education. There's certain ideas, certain principles, like profit at any cost. Mm-hmm. The end justifies the means.
Yep.
There's a lot of these principles that are hidden in our modern education system. And as I said, they're never vocalized openly, but they're there. If you search and look very closely, you'll find all of these principles, which are not very healthy for young people to absorb into their system. And so, yeah, modern education, Krishnamurti and Gurdjieff and Osho all said needs to be reformed in a major way. They said it's no use tinkering around the edges. It has to be changed dramatically to rid it of all of the negative elements.
And Steiner was saying this as well, Rudolf Steiner.
Yes, and Rudolf Steiner said exactly the same thing.
But sadly, because the majority, well, we don't have anybody like that that's in charge in any kind of governmental power. So this is why we're not having that kind of education or that kind of system for people. And if it did, it would give free will, free reign. And I think, the governments and that are scared of that kind of thing, aren't they? Because then they can't keep us all as sheep.
That's right. So going back to the principle, cleansing the emotional center, if we work at removing from our emotional field a lot of these negative elements, which really are an overlay from society on our emotional chakra. So in order to do this, we have to work at the opposites. We have to work at generosity, sensitivity, kindness. We have to work at benevolence. We have to work at manifesting in a positive way. Sometimes, even when we don't feel too positive, we have to work at still remaining positive and developing positivity. And this, I will admit, is not easy. It's quite difficult. But from personal experience, I have to say it does generate great dividends for the person, because it will help you destroy a lot of these elements in yourself, especially when you use it in tandem with karma yoga. If you use karma yoga in tandem with cleansing the emotional chakra, the two work very well together, because you cannot stop on the street and meet somebody from a far-flung country and give them 40 quid because they're absolutely desperate. You cannot do that without changing some small element in the heart center. It's not possible. It's just not possible. And we must do certain things like this. We must open ourselves to actually doing certain elements of karma yoga, which are very, very important to change elements in the heart center. So, as I said, both things go hand in hand, karma yoga and cleansing the emotional center. And it's particularly important, I would say, for both men and women. But for women, because I do counseling and therapy, I find that a lot of women have a lot of negative material stuck around the heart chakra. They have a lot of resentment and anger, especially towards men. That's a completely another subject. We could spend
we could do another one on that.
We could do a whole workshop on that, or a whole radio program on that. But women who are probably listening to this program right now will understand what I'm talking about, because most of the women that I meet and most of the women that I do therapy with have a lot of anger inside, and they find it very difficult to remove this anger. It stays with them for a very long time, and this anger, it changes into a poison, which basically poisons their life. And you can even see it in their manifestations. You can even see it in their body language. You can even see it in their eyes. And for the woman, it's very important that she removes this poison from her body, from her psyche, from the chakra, the heart chakra. This is obviously not an easy thing to do, but one has to do this work, and it's part of esoteric work to cleanse the emotional center. In fact, it's one of the most important facets in the beginning of spiritual work, because we cannot make any progress if we are negative entities. You cannot build a positive spiritual structure on a negative superstructure. It's just not possible.
There needs to be a cleansing first.
Yes, we have to do a cleansing, and that means sometimes coming to terms with some of our own mistakes. We may have made mistakes with partners in the past, with friends. We may have even done people some wrongs unintentionally, or maybe even intentionally. We have to we may have taken revenge on certain people, or they may have taken revenge upon us. And scars are left, emotional scars. And of course, we're only touching the tip of the iceberg when we're talking about these elements of the emotion. There are so many others. But we have to work at changing our normal everyday ambience from being negative to being positive. So when we approach other people, we must approach people as much as possible from a positive perspective. And we must approach people with charity internally in ourselves, and an openness.
And not just charity of putting a bit of money in the tin pot.
It can be
that's
much
on the shop counter.
broader than that.
Yes, it has to be.
I mean, if we do karma yoga, it has to be very tangible things that we do. It doesn't always mean dipping our hand in our pocket. It can be actually helping somebody in distress. It can mean helping people we wouldn't normally help, in inverted commas, in distress. We might be afraid to help a gypsy, or it may be socially unacceptable to help a gypsy or something like this. But
we shouldn't let them kind of faults stop us doing it, because that's a social prejudice rather than feeling from the heart.
That's it. So, yeah, cleansing the emotional center, we could actually speak for another hour on this, but I think we've probably said enough.
Well, I've seen the time and we do have to stop. So I would like to thank you, Joe. Joe, you're a lifelong student of esotericism and you're a qualified counsellor and therapist. So if anybody did want to get in touch with you, we're going to recommend the website, which is www.openingtheinnermind.weebly.com. And that Weebly is WEEBLY / at the end of .com. So once again, I'd like to thank you, Joe, and I'd just like to finish on a Dr. Seuss quote. And Dr. Seuss says that those that mind don't matter, and those that matter don't mind. Thanks, and until next time, peace and out.